like the traffic has cooled down a little bit. So I think we'll get started. Once again, I want to welcome everyone. I will be your host today, Jonathan de Kock, and with me, my co-host, George, and we will be presenting a basic workshop on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The goal of today's workshop is to build a CV that sits on the browser, and we can do a workshop perhaps after this that discusses how to get it there. But for now, all you need is your local browser and a text editor, and the end product will look something like this. For the purpose of the workshop, we've decided to use Homer J. Simpson as our victim, and we will be compiling his CV to look exactly like this once the workshop is over. Once again, if you want to be an active participant, then please feel free to open up a text editor and program along with us. Your browser will be intelligent enough to be able to compile your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code, and you will be able to have a version looking similar like this on your own browser. So without further ado, I think it is time that we jump in. To start off, I think it's a great idea just to explain a little bit about the Internet of Things and how browsers interpret what a website is. A website is comprised up of mainly three components: your HTML document, your CSS document, and your JavaScript document. What happens is whenever you access a site such as Google or Facebook or Instagram, if you're using the browser version, then your browser will send out an HTTP request to the server. Once the server receives this request, then it will parse it down and decide which files it needs to send you. The server will then send you these files through a return request known as a response, and then your browser will decipher the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files and present it in a neat looking browser interface. The way that this is done is through something known as the DOM, the Dynamic Object Model. The Dynamic Object Model is a type of renderer that renders HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. You wouldn't want to be reading HTML files in its current state because it doesn't look really pretty. And as humans, we are visually inclined and therefore need some sort of a compiler in order to turn our somewhat ugly looking code into a beautiful interface. So getting back to the three languages, we have HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. For the first part of this workshop, I will be covering the basics of HTML and CSS. George will then in the second part cover JavaScript. HTML is otherwise known as Hypertext Markup Language, and that will act as the skeleton of our website. It is used with specific selectors that have been defined by the WWW3 consortium, otherwise known as the World Wide Web Consortium, and they have standardized a scripting language that can be interpreted by most of the world's browsers. Most of HTML elements look really bland, and we would like to add some color, add some styling, and make it look really appealing to our reviewers. Therefore, the World Wide Web Consortium decided on creating a cascaded style sheets language known as CSS. This acts as the skin of our metaphorical human website, making it look pretty, giving it amazing colors, and making it more appealing for users. George will later explain how JavaScript is used to make your website more interactive and user-friendly. So without further ado, let's hop in. I'm currently working on a Linux system, and as a result, I have a terminal interface in front of me. So I think the first thing that we should do is create the basic files that are going to be used for our web application. The first file that we will create is an index.html file. In the terminal, you do this by using the touch command followed by the name and then the language. You can see that our file has now been created. So I'll open this up in a text editor. We currently have the HTML file open in the text editor. And what will happen is once we run this through the browser will use the DOM in order to render the HTML data that we have parsed to it and create the specific elements. In order to define an HTML document, you will have to open something which is known as a tag. This is the basic layout of an HTML document. The doc type attribute specifies which language we will use and tells the DOM how it should be parsed. The HTML tags show the browser that whatever is inside of these tags will be rendered by the DOM. Let us just hop back onto a more visual view so that I can explain how the tags work. Within HTML, you have an opening tag, a closing tag, some information, and the whole family is known as an element. There are many elements that make up an HTML document and that can be parsed by the DOM. Some of these tags are known as paragraph tags, anchor tags, your header tags, your body tags, and a variety of other tags such as divs or iframes. But we'll get to those in a bit. As you can see, we do have many tags defined. So let's break it up a bit further. You can see that, maybe I should make this a bit bigger for you guys. There we go. So the first part of our HTML document is the head tags. Whatever is in the head tags defines some metadata for our website. These are things such as the language that the website will be comprised of, a bit bigger for everyone. All right, no problem. How's that? Are we all good? You guys could just raise your hands if you're happy with the size of the text. Great, good to see. All right, so getting back to the head tags. Any tags that are children of the head tag will tell the DOM a little bit more information about the website. However, the user will not see anything that is in the head tags. As you can see, we have a meta tag defined here, which clarifies the character set that our website will use. We have a viewport, which gives some functionality to the DOM, such as scrolling or viewing on mobile devices. And then we have the title. So the title tag defines what the title will be for a web page. Just to give you a good example, if we do open this up in Chrome, which I will do now, we'll say Google Chrome and then the index.html file. If we save this file, you can see that the title is set to be document. So if we go into the browser and we refresh the browser, then the title for our web page is document.
Jonathan, can I ask that you maybe show everyone that's not on Linux, those that are on Windows, how to show the document in their browser by dragging and dropping?
Yes, of course. Let me just spin up my user interface. All right, so there is a user interface version of what I'm working with. And here is the browser. If you're not working on Linux, then what you can do is you can drop the file, the HTML file, not the CSS file or JavaScript file that we'll create in a bit, but you can drop the HTML file directly into your browser, and this will open up the document. So currently, because we do not have any tags defined in the body, there is currently nothing on our website. But what we will do is we will start creating our own tags in a bit, and then you will see how the website gets populated into the end product, which is this. So just to give you guys a practical example, we'll make this bigger again. If I do change this document type to personal CV, and we save it, and we head over to the browser and we refresh, then you'll see that the title changes to personal CV. So now I think it's time that we start describing a few more elements that will make up the CV. Let us do that. The first element that we will look at is known as a div element, otherwise known as a divider. So in order to do that, we will open up the HTML tag and type in div. Keep in mind that if you do not have a rich text editor like mine, then you will just have to type out all the tags manually. But because I am using an integrated development environment, some of the tags do get auto-completed for me. So the divide element that we have just created acts as a container, an invisible container. So even though we have the divide or container element defined, you still won't see anything on the web page. But if you do open up the inspect tool on Chrome, you can either right click and click inspect, or you can use the keyboard shortcut F12 to do so. Then you will see that once we open up the body tags, the div tag is there. Now, currently, because there is nothing in the div tags, it is set to a height and width of 0. But when we do add information, then it will expand according to the children's heights and width. We use div tags in order to separate elements in our HTML document. And if we are implementing CSS later on, then you will see how div tag can be especially useful in order to create backdrops and other separators. So the next tag that we'll be discussing is the image tag. Now, the image tag defines any images that will be on your application. Currently, currently, in order to get an image tag, you will type out this syntax, which is your open sort of HTML tag, and then image, the source, and the alt. So heading back to some of our visuals, I would just want to explain what these tags mean. Okay, it's not here. Let me get that for you. All right, so the source and alt attributes of your tag have specific functionality. Source describes what image or the path of the image that you would like. This can either be a reference as an HTTP request, or it can be a file sitting within your directory. Currently, I do have a file that is not in this directory, but what we can do is fetch it and pop it in there. And I will do this by heading back one directory and fetching the homer.jpg file. And then I will move the homer.jpg file into our workshop directory. And now you can see that homer.jpg is in our working directory. So what we can do is from the source, we can just type homer.jpg. And now you'll see that when we go back to our browser and refresh it, then Homer Simpson is eating a donut. Keep in mind that this image tag is embedded within the div tag, but I will get to that in a bit. Now, let us speak a little bit more about making things look pretty, because currently this does not look really appealing. What we would like to do is we'd like to move Homer more towards the center of our application and maybe give a little bit of a backdrop so that we can separate Homer from the rest of the application. In order to do this, we will define a few variables. Currently, in order to do that, we will edit our body attribute and implement some CSS. So speaking about CSS, it has slightly different syntax than what an HTML syntax looks like. And I will take you through that. So with CSS, we have our selector, which would either be the raw element that HTML is defined as, and then we will give it a property, and that property will have a specific value. All the selector's properties and values are defined by the World Wide Web consortium, and you can find that online. Just to show you, if you type in W3 schools, you'll see that by looking at the World Wide Web Consortium's landing page, you can learn about all the different tags and how the tags are used. Cool. So getting back to our project. For the body, we would like to use a specific selector called the text align selector. And that looks like this. Sorry, we have to use a style selector, and then it has to be text align. And then we need to give it a property, which is of type center. And if we do this, then you'll see Homer is in the center of our application. We would also like to give the body a certain background color. And this background color can be defined by using the property background color and then giving it a color, such as any one of these. And I think we will choose gray. So now you can see that the body of our application is gray and the image is still got a white background. Looking closer to our final product, I think. Let's move on. Using CSS like this is defined as inline CSS, and this is great. However, in a bit, I will take you through setting up your own CSS document in order to abstract some of the code so that you can reuse it. Let's add a bit more information. For now, we will create another div. And inside this div, we will have an h1 tag. And this h1 tag is a header 1. And in HTML, you have 6 different headers, h1 to h6. And all of the different headers define different sizes of text. So for our main heading in our application, we will make it the name of the candidate for the CV, which is Homer Simpson. So we will say Homer J. Simpson. And if we look at the web page, and there he is. Furthermore, Homer needs some more information. So we will add an h3 tag and then fill out some information. In order to make this process a bit quicker, I have a template with some information, and I will just pop that in there. And if we look at the browser, then we can see a bit more. We would like to differentiate this black text from the information given, and therefore this text I think we will make white. So in order to define your h3 element as white text, you will use the style tag again, and then we will have the property called color and give it a color, which is white. And now the text for Homer's details are in white. Now this looks great. However, we can still work on it a little bit in order to get the functionality or to get the styling a bit different. As you can see here, we have a nice blue background with some curved edges, and this doesn't really look that great. So what we can do is, before we carry on, I think it would be a really good idea for me to explain what a CSS document is. Now, within programming, you would always like to separate your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And in order to do that, we will create the CSS file. So here we will do, go into the workshop directory, touch site.css. All right. So if you are creating any CSS file, you will always create, give it a specific name. Usually, if we are creating CSS files for multiple web pages on a website, then it will be the page name followed by the .css file extension. And you will then see that it appears in your working directory. In order to get this file to be read by your HTML file, we will use a specific link within the head tags, because the head tags define some additional information that aren't seen by a user. And the tag that we will use inside of the head tags to link up the CSS document is link. Rel is a resolution display for style sheet, and that basically defines whether the CSS document is a style sheet or whether it has some sort of other functionality. And the href is your hyperreference, and the hyperreference attribute is given a value which corresponds to the name of your CSS file. Very similar to how source is used to define the source of an image. So in this case, it will be site.css. So now that your CSS document is linked up, any CSS that you add inside of this file will automatically be rendered by the DOM and implemented onto selectors such as classes or IDs that we will implement on our HTML file. So what we can do is, like I've shown you on this visual, we will have the selector, the property, and then the value. So in our CSS file, we will define the body to be a selector, and then we will give it some properties and then a value. So let's do that. We will have our body selector, and then it will have this attribute and value. And directly under that, it will have another attribute and value. And we will have to save both files. And as a result of not using inline CSS, we can take the style tag away. And you will see that it looks exactly the same. However, we have now split up the information. So your CSS is in a CSS file and your HTML is in an HTML file. We can do this same for H3, but I think just for referencing purposes, once we push this to Git, we will leave it exactly like that. I think the next thing that we can work on is setting up this white page and then the blue heading space for our image and the other details. In order to do that, we'll need to talk a little bit about how the DOM perceives certain displays and how it works with elements within those displays. And then once that is done, then you will see the final results. But before we get to that, I think it would be a good idea to first explain how we use classes and IDs within CSS files. So it would be a bit confusing if within our CSS file, we were only allowed to use the div as selectors, because you can see here that we have a parent div, but the child of the parent div is also div. So if we were to select all divs and give it a background color of red, then it would give all the divs the background color of red. However, what if we wanted the child div to not be the same as the parent div? We would need some sort of identifier in place so that we can differentiate between the parent div and child div. And for that, we have two different types of identifiers. The one identifier is known as a class identifier, and the other identifier is an ID. In order to define a class identifier, we use the keyword class and then give that class a specific name. And if we're doing ID, then we use ID and we give the ID a specific name. So for this div, we will give the ID a name of CV wrapper. And this just tells the DOM that this div has a name, and we can now use this name in order to identify the div throughout the DOM. So when we go into the sites.css file, I'm going to remove the div selector. But when we go into site.css, we can now call this ID within the CSS file. And in order to call an ID, we use the hash symbol, and then followed by the hash symbol, we use the name of the ID. So in this case, CV wrapper. And CV wrapper is defined as this section that we have set up here in red. However, it's not red anymore, but it'll soon have a different color. It is, our IDE is giving me a little bit of an error because it doesn't have any rule sets in place, but we will soon add the properties and values for that. So I think the first property that we will give the CV wrapper will be the display property. And the display property defines a div. The display property tells the DOM exactly how the div should be displayed on the web page. You get various different types of display properties, such as block, contents, flex, flexbox, and all the rest on that list. And each one of these values will tell the DOM how to interpret the div differently. For this case, we will use inline block. And what inline block does is it tells the DOM that the elements mustn't be placed underneath each other, but rather next to each other. And then it also, the block section tells the DOM that we are still allowed to give those elements a height or a width of our own if we choose to do so. So now that we've saved both files, we can go back and look at our changes. Apologies. In order for this to take place, we will need to set a specific width. And we will say with width, you can use either pixels, but in this case, I think we will use a percentage, which the DOM can interpret and render as specific pixels, just to make it easier for us. We will also give the CV wrapper some padding, and basically what padding is its white space that is defined by the DOM, and it tells the DOM that elements need some space next to each other. And the padding that we will give for the CV wrapper will be 30 pixels. I also just want to add another div in here with an ID. I think what we will do is, in order to get this to work properly, we will do this. We'll remove this ID and put it up here, and then define a new property of profile wrapper. That seems better. And then what we can do is the profile wrapper we can have as display. And then for this display, we will have the display defined as flex. And then we should have a good selection. So if we look at the inspect tab and we just inspect what we have created so far, we have our div, which is currently of width 60% of the screen. and it currently has no background color, but we will set that soon. And then inside of this div, we have another div, but you can see that the names are different, and therefore the CSS document knows which attributes to give to which div. Inside of this div, we have the image, and then we have another div, which basically houses our information of Homer Simpson. And that would then be Homer J. Simpson, and then the H3, which defines all the information that Homer needs. So let's add a little bit more information to the CSS document so that we can make this look a bit more pretty. Let's give the CV wrapper a background color of white so that we can have that page effect. And let's give the profile wrapper a background color of blue. And I don't like any of these blues, so I have a custom blue selected over here. Great. And let's see what it looks like. All right, so that looks better, but it's very blocky, and we don't like a blocky display. We'd like some of these borders to be rounded. So what we can do is, if we want to get these borders in a more round shape, we can actually select the border of our div and give that a specific radius, either in pixels or in percentages. But for this case, I think we will stick to pixels. So let's go back. And give it a border. Okay, we will get to that in a bit. Let's just quickly have a look at all the participants and see if there are any questions. No? Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, not seeing any questions. Let's move on.
Jonathan, can I ask? Earlier on, you said you're using a custom blue. Can you please explain how that works with hex codes and such?
Of course, of course. So with background color, the DOM interprets color in a variety of different ways. The one way would be hex codes. And hex codes is basically your 16-bit version of RGB. So my text editor is smart enough in order to actually spit out the RGB values. RGB basically stands for red, green, and blue. And if you're working with a computer and defining colors, then you will basically have a mixture of colors made up of 255 shades of red, 255 shades of green, and 255 shades of blue. And then what we do is, whenever we are using a web browser, we like to use either the 16-bit version of RGB, which is this hex code. So the first two numbers in this code defines what red is, and then the second two digits will define green, and the last digits will define blue. And if you would like to use RGB, then you can also use the RGB colors. So if we just look at the RGB color that was given to us here, what I will do is remove that and then use RGB. And then you can insert one shade from 0 to 255 for red, and one shade from 0 to 255 for green, and one shade from 0 to 255 for blue. And depending on the colors that you have selected, it will spit out a specific color with all the combinations. George, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that looks good.
Great. But for now, I think we will just stick to the hex color. All right. I think the next thing that we can do is define our the next part of our application, and that would just be to make this image more round, because the image itself is very it is a square image, but we would like to make it more of a round image like this. And so what we can do is we can use the border radius property on an image itself, but instead of using the pixels, we will now use the percentage selector. So let us head over to the text area. And now I have a few options at my disposal. I could either give the image a name, such as ID of maybe profile image. But what I'm going to show you instead is another way that you can get to specific elements, and another way that the DOM knows how to identify elements. And that is with the parent and child attributes. So we know that the DOM knows that this div has a name of profile wrapper. And the DOM also knows that the child of the profile wrapper is this image, and then another child of the profile wrapper is the div. And then this div itself has two more children. And this is known as the parent-child concept within web development. So the body is the main parent, and the body has different children. However, the children can also have children. And so you can define some sort of a family tree within your web document. Now, what's really nice about this is that when you're working with CSS selectors, you can use this functionality to your advantage. So what we will do is, instead of giving the image tag a specific ID or class, I will show you guys classes in a bit. Just want to finish up on IDs. You can, instead of giving the image ID, you can rather identify the ID of this div and then ask to show you its children, and then from its children set specific attributes. So if we want to select the image and give the image a few styles, then we can head over to our CSS document and we can use the profile wrapper. But instead of just using the profile wrapper, I want to identify the child of a profile wrapper. And what we can see that they have two children, and the one child that we want is the image tag. So we will use just have a space and then type image. And if you use this declaration in your CSS file, then the DOM will know that it needs to look for an element with an ID of profile wrapper, and then it needs to find the child that is an image. What you can also do is, if your image has a specific ID, such as the example that we had earlier, which was profile image, then you can say, find the ID, which is profile wrapper, and then find the child in that ID, which is profile image. And that would look like this. However, we will just stick to image for now, just because it looks more pretty. So now that you guys know about the parent and child declarations, we can move on and give it some styles. So we said that we want to make this image a circle more round, and if we're using percentages to describe our border radius, then a percentage, 50% from the center of the image to whichever side will give a round shape around our image. So what we will do is we will give the border radius a 50% radius from the length of the image. So we'll say border radius, can't spell, border radius and then 50%. And you might not be able to see it now, but okay, you can see it quite nicely. There the image becomes round. However, the image is very up against the side and the top and the bottom of this div, and we'd like to give it a bit of spacing. Now, earlier on in the webinar, I mentioned some padding. We can use a padding, and then we also have a another sort of spacing attribute, which is called margin. And for this use case, I think we will use margin. Basically, what padding does is you can use padding on a specific piece of text like this in order to make the space on the top and the bottom of the text longer. So if you wanted more white space in between, say, the phone number and the email, then you'd use padding. However, if you're working with an image or a div, then you can use margin instead. Padding on a div will also be, so padding on a div goes inside, and a margin on an element pushes other items away. I'll give you a good example in a second. Let's just get back to the editor. So like I said, we want to add some margin space, which is white space, to our profile image so that it can look more pretty and so that we can see some more of that blue. And for that, we will say margin, and we'll make the margin 20 pixels. And there you can see that we have added a little bit of white space to our image so that it's not so pushed up against the walls. If you want to be a little bit more pedantic and have different margins for specific sides of your image, then you can specify it. So if we wanted, say, just the left side, so it would be margin left, we could say 50 pixels, and margin top 10 pixels. Then you'll see that the browser interprets that a little differently. So margin from the left-hand side will be 50 pixels, and from the top, it'll be 10 pixels. However, if we just use the abstract version, which is just margin, then it will apply the margin space to all sides of our image. And I think we'll stick to that. So margin 20 pixels. And there we go. So now that we have the profile picture set up and we have the information for Homer, I think it's about time that we move on and discuss some of the details that Homer Simpson has on his CV. So if we look at the finished example, we can see that he has a title for the summary of qualifications, and then he has a little bit of text that defines the qualification. Then we also have a line, a horizontal line that is drawn across, and I'll show you how to do that. Then we have another heading followed by a few subheadings and this text on the right-hand side. And I will show you how you can move text to different parts of the document using something known as a float. All right, so let's tackle the summary qualification section. Heading back to our HTML document, we can now create underneath we're still in the CV wrapper, however, underneath the profile wrapper, which is this blue section, we would want to insert some information just below the blue section. So just underneath that, we will open up a new div, a new container, if you will. And I think we will give that an ID just so that we can select it in the CSS document. It'll be an ID of summary. And as we said, there is a title and then some smaller text. And so in order to get this title, we will use maybe not necessarily an H1 tag because that's very big, but we'll use a H2 tag, which is slightly smaller, and it'll be a summary of qualifications. And if we look at that, then you can see there is summary of qualifications just underneath our profile wrapper. And then we'll have to add some text which describes the summary qualification. So in order to do that, we will use something which is known as a P tag or a paragraph tag. Now a P tag defines any paragraph that the DOM needs to interpret. So any large amounts of text that will be interpreted. And I have the dummy text available here, so I will just copy it in and change the size a bit. And if we save this document and refresh the browser, then you'll see that there is the paragraph that we want. And after this, because you know that this is inside of a container, I think after the container, we'd like to have that horizontal line that is drawn across here. And the World Wide Web Consortium was nice enough to include a tag for that within HTML. And that is just HR, which stands for horizontal rule. And so if we refresh the browser now, there's our horizontal rule. All right. Now, you can see that the summary text is also a black color, and maybe we'd like to change the color of that. But before we do that, I think it'd be a good idea just to add some more text, and then we can style this document and make it look more pretty. So let us do that. So underneath the horizontal rule, we can open up a new div, and we will have all the employment history of Homer Simpson. So it'll have title, which is employment history, then various subtitles and a list of sort of the job description of what he did, and then also the year that he spent working there. And so what we'll do is we will call this a maybe employment history ID, and then we'll say employment history wrapper. And these IDs will be used by George later on for when we hook up the JavaScript to the application. And then what we will do is we want this heading again. So we'll say H2, and we will give it the heading employment history. And for the sake of saving some time, I'll just copy and paste that in there. All right. And then we now have reached our first entry. So basically this first entry. Now it's always a good idea if you have something like this, which you can put into a div, then it would always be a good idea to do it, because you can then maybe style the entire div and make it a bit smaller and make it a bit bigger. And you just have it in a container. So we will open up a new div under this. And inside of this div, we will have an even smaller heading tag, such as maybe H3. And then let's see, Springfield nuclear power plant. Okay, so I will just grab that from here. There we go, Springfield. So now you can see that we have the main heading of the section, and then we have the first heading of the description of the workplace that he was at. And you might want a little bit of a say job allocation status at the bottom here, so we can add that in. And what we will do is we will make this italics, and for italics you can use a special selector known as I, and anything that is inside of the I tags will be italics. So it can be, maybe he was the safety inspector, and there it is. So you can see that is italic text. If you want bold text, then you can use the keyword B for bold text. And there are a wide array of many other text changing attributes or tags that you can use. The next thing that we should do is we should create a list which describes some of the things that Homer did, the achievements that he had within his employment history. And you can see here that we have this sort of list display, And in HTML, you also have the ability to create either ordered lists or unordered lists. So an unordered list would be these dots, and an ordered list would be a numbering system from, say, 1 to 10, or Roman numerals, or anything that describes any order from a list. So to use the unordered list, we will use the tag UL, which is unordered list. And then inside of a UL tag, you need to define a list item. And in order to define a list item, we use the li tag. And each li tag within an unordered list will be a new dot that has been put down on the list. And so I will just pre-fill these with some text that I have saved. Great. And if we look at this, then there we have it. Now we're still missing the year that it was present at the power plant. So, and you can see that this is on the right-hand side of the page, and it is in line with this heading that we have. So what we can do is we can make this heading run all across this section of the web page, and then we can just add some text to the right-hand side. And ideally, you'd like to align this text to the right so that it stays on the right-hand side, irrespective of whether the screen becomes smaller or whether it becomes bigger. So if we want to, within a specific tag, define some text that behaves differently, then we can add a special tag known as span. Now what span does is span acts very much like a div, in the sense that it is completely invisible and it just acts like a container. The only difference is it acts like a container only for text, and you can't add any margin or padding space to it. And in this span tag, we will then add the specific time duration that Homer spent at the power plant. So you can see that it is still very much on the left-hand side of the screen, and we would like to move it all the way over to the right. And we can do that using CSS. So we'll move over to the sites.css file that we have created. And then what we'll do is maybe say, now before we do that, I think let me first explain what this is. Wait, no, let's first do this. So we can see that this needs to be blue and that needs to be blue. And we would not necessarily like to select all H2 tags for this purpose, but we also can't give this an ID of, say give it an ID of summary qualification and give this an ID of employment history. That wouldn't work because an ID is, it has to be unique. So if you give an ID to a specific element on your page, you can't have an ID of that same element. So how HTML overcomes this issue is they incorporate something known as a class. So let's take a look at classes. We want the employment history, and we want the summary of qualifications to be a specific color. And so what we can do is we can give both of these tags a specific class, and we'll give it a class of section title. And I will do it over here as well. So we'll say class section title. And now instead of selecting the H2 tag, we will rather just select the class of section title and then give that a specific style. So if we head over to the sites.css file and we say, we'll use the dot in order to identify that it's a class. So the hash symbol is for IDs and the dot symbol is for classes. So we'll say dot section title, and we'll open up our tags, and then we will give it a specific color. And these colors are nice, but I'll rather use this one. And remember that you have to put a hash in front of that in order to make it a color. And there we go. Now you can see that summary of qualifications and employment history has a certain color. All right, moving on. We can do sort of the same thing with all of the specific dates over here in order to move them to the right-hand side of the screen. As you can see, all of these are on the right. So it would be great if we could have an identifier to grab with CSS to say that all this text must be on the right. So what I think we'll do is maybe just add that identifier so long. We already know that we will have many of these employment divs, and therefore I think it's a great idea that we give the divs a class as well. So we'll call the divs, maybe we'll give it a class over here, and we'll say that this class is employment entry. And then what we can do is we'll have the employment entry. And then what we'll do is from the employment entry, we will select the H3 tag. And inside of the H3 tag, there'll be the span tag. So this is a really good example of just to show you the power of CSS and how you can select the children of children. So we will do the employment entry, and from the employment entry, we want to select the H3 tag, and from the H3 tag, we want to select the span tag. And then we can open up the tags, and we will use a specific property known as float. And float basically tells text either it needs to remain on the right-hand side or it needs to remain on the left-hand side. You can use float for divs as well. So that means a div will constantly remain on the right side of the screen or on the left side of the screen. And you can also use both simultaneously to constantly have a div at the bottom of the screen. But I think that is for a more advanced lesson in CSS. So now that we have the text floating on the right-hand side, you can see that the text is indeed on the right. And now what we'll do is just to make things a little quicker, we will copy our employments entry a few times. As you can see, we've just copied, so just the employment entry. And if we refresh the page, then you can see that the employment entry is now been repeated 4 times. And then what we can do is we can just edit the information so that it looks very similar to this information. And then we'll just carry on with the education and awards. George, if anyone has questions or comments so far, then they're more than welcome to ask, or you can just sort of speak about anything that I left out while I do these changes.
Yeah, I mean, it looks good to me. You did cover a good part of the basics, and if you followed along, you should understand the more than just the basics of how HTML works. You hit all the important points there: the head, the linking, body, a lot of different kinds of tags, a lot of CSS, how you can align items, move them around, color them, stuff like that. So with what you've taught the students so far, you should be able to make a pretty good profile, yeah, for your employer, or for doing applications, or yeah, personal website, whatever you like to call it.
Are there any questions? Any questions or comments from the users? You guys can just type it in the chat, and then we'll get to those.
Did you mention what the BR tag is, what it does?
The BR tag, yes. So the break tag in HTML just describes a break in text. So if you would like to start a new line within your either a head tag or a paragraph tag, then you can use the BR tag in order to split it up. So as you can see, I did it in my text editor just to show you nicely. But if I were to remove the BR tag from, say, after the United States, then it would still appear nicely in my text editor. But because the DOM doesn't work with any white space, unfortunately, you will see that it reacts slightly differently in the browser. So after United States, the phone number will start, but the phone number will be on the same line. And the reason for this is because this div that we defined over here has a display of inline text. And also because it is in the same H3 tag. So if we were to have multiple H3 tags with these, with this text in, so one H3 tag for the street and one H3 tag for the area, one H3 tag for the phone, for the email address, then you'll see it'll also do the breaks, because after a H3 tag, there is automatically a break that is added. But for now, we'll just add the break tag in again. And if we refresh the browser, then you'll see it pops onto a new line. All right. So now we have all the employment history done. And I think after the employment history, we would just like to add a new line to this, another sort of line. So we'll just do another horizontal rule. And then it's time to tackle the education part. And the education part is, you can see here, it uses the same styling and the same sort of tag that employment history and summary uses. So we can just get this identifier that we have described in our HTML document and then type out education. So what's nice is once you've defined all your styles and views, then it's really easy to sort of reuse the definitions within your CSS in order to have multiple pages looking very similar on your website. So after the div, we will just do, well, after the horizontal rule, we'll create a new div, and that div will have an ID of education. And George will use, like I said, he'll use this ID at a later stage. And then the H2, which is going to be education, you can see that, oh, wait, this needs to be obviously within the wrapper. There we go. So this education, we want the same color as employment. But in our CSS file, we have already identified a class that sets the color, and that class is section title. So now what we can do is we can just say that this H2 must have a class of section title, and then it will automatically pull all the attributes that have been described here, such as the color. And now the education H2 tag will also have a color of blue. And then what we can do is we can add a little bit more information. So the H3 tag, and in the H3 tag, it'll be maybe the school that he attended. And then we'll have maybe the certificate that he got. Great. And this indentation is horrible. The DOM doesn't really care about any indentation, but if you are working with many programmers in industry and you would like to keep things nice and neat, then I would suggest always just keeping your indentation up to scratch. And then the last part of the HTML for this document is setting up another horizontal rule and then having the awards system in place. If you are doing any sort of HTML development, then I would highly recommend using some sort of an IDE, such as VS Code, which I'm currently using, or maybe Sublime Text is a great one. Code Blocks is also really good. Yeah, any IDE that works for you, because it provides code highlighting and just makes things look great. So here I've set up the awards section. And for the awards, I would like to have the here in bold. I think we've spoken about making things bold or italic, but for making things bold, we use the B tag. So I will use the B tag over here, and I'll put the year in, so 1992. And then outside of the B tag, because I don't want the award description to be bold, I'll have it outside the B tag, but still inside the P tag. tag, and you will just put maybe the award description. And there is the award. Great stuff. And that is how we have created a CV online for Homer Simpson. So that just covers the basics of HTML and CSS. I think you now know how to go out there and play around with HTML tags. You have a good idea of how the DOM works and how it interprets the tags and how it interprets the children of specific tags. And then you also learned how to use IDs and classes in order to make better selections within the CSS document. And we also showed you some properties that you can use within the CSS document in order to make things look really pretty and in order to move things around on the screen. I think we'll take a short break and just answer any questions in the chat if you guys have any. And then George will move on to show you how we can implement some JavaScript code onto the application just to give it some functionality. So maybe when you click a button, then it makes the CV, like it gives it a night mode so that you can read it in the dark and save your eyes. So that's some of the things that you can look forward to. And yeah, we will, I think, take maybe a 5-minute break, George.
Yeah, I'd say let's make it 9 minutes just for the ADHD people out there. And
yeah,
it's
it was 20 a little long,
5. You know, yeah, at 20 past 5, we'll reconvene and we'll get on to the JS part of the business. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you know, now's a good shot. Jonathan and I are here. Just let us know what we can answer.
We've got a question here. What does class do? So class, like we've discussed, it is an identifier that you can use in CSS. It is basically, it's also a naming convention very similar to ID, but it allows the identifier to be used multiple times. So if we were to, so here, for example, we have ID equals education. So this div has an ID of identification. It's basically a name that you give the div. The downside to using ID is that you can only use an ID once. So because we've already given this div the ID of education, we can't give this div an ID of education as well, because the DOM will not know how to interpret that, because you can't have two IDs. However, with a class, it's different, because multiple divs can have the same class. And then what happens is in your CSS file, when you select the class, then it will select all elements that have the class as sort of appended to that tag. Does that answer your question? Great stuff. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to just pop them in the chat and we will answer them. Yeah, sure. So we have a question here asking if I could just go over divs again and its format. So the div is, you can think of it as an invisible container that you can put elements inside. And all it does is you can then use the div in order to either move things around on your website or to contain specific items. So it's always a great idea to use divs and to create these sort of metaphorical sections in your website so that you can make it more user-friendly and presentable. Just to give you an example here, we used a div to create this white page. So this white page is a div. And then we also used a div for this blue section. And we just gave it two different colors so that you can differentiate between the two. So if we go back to the code base, I can show you. So the CV wrapper over here is a div, and that defines this white section. And you can see this one div houses many different elements, which are all the elements that are inside of the white page. So if we wanted to add something at the bottom, say of this white page, then we would do it not inside this div, which has an ID of CV wrapper, but we would rather go down to the bottom where the div ends and maybe say add a paragraph tag with some text. And now you'll see that when we reload the page, it's now no longer in the div, which has a background of white, but it is now out of the div. Does that answer your question, Quaz? Great. Is it compulsory to arrange the tags inside CSS in order, or can you put them in any order you understand? No, so it is compulsory to arrange the tags in your CSS in order of the parent-child relationship that your elements have. To give you an example, let's just remove this real quick. If you have, I used the example when I explained the parent-child relationships. If you have this image over here, which is a child of the div with an ID of profile wrapper, then you can have the selector over here, which is the profile wrapper, which is the parent. So you'll always start at the parent level and then work your way down. So in this case, we've started with the div, which has an ID of profile wrapper, and then we had a space, and the space basically just said that, okay, we're going one level deeper. And then we could have either selected this div or the image. And what we did was we selected the image. So here we selected the image, and then we gave the image certain attributes. So what we can do is we can have maybe a paragraph here, which is maybe says George and Jono. And then just to show you what it looks like on the browser. So there's George and Jono. It's horribly styled and it doesn't look great. But what we can do is we can use the profile wrapper. And then we can select the paragraph tag because the paragraph tag is within the profile wrapper div. And then we can give it a color. Maybe we'll make the color red. So we'll set color red. And if we refresh this page, then you'll see that it's red now because we've used the appropriate description. So if we maybe swap these two around, it wouldn't necessarily complain, but the style will not be given to that text. Because what will happen is it will look for a p tag on the document, any p tag, and then once it finds a p tag, it will then within the p tag try and find an ID of profile wrapper, and no such identifier is made. Does that answer your question, William? Okay. Kotlejo asks if I can please just explain the meta tags inside the head. Sure. So these meta tags are used, okay, maybe let me just backtrack again and just say that anything inside of the head tags, so between this tag and this tag, anything that you place inside here will not be seen by the web page. It will not be generated. So all tags that you would like to have be seen on the HTML document would ideally have to be in the body tags. So there's a opening body tag over here, and then a closing body tag over here. And what is most often put inside the head tags is meta tags and the links to your style sheets. So you can have multiple style sheets. I mean, here we have site.css, but I can have site 2, site 3, and site 4, and I can pull all the styles through that are in all those style sheets. I can pull in, and then I can use all the styles. And so just now that you have the understanding of how the head tags are, why the head tags are important, we can move on to the meta tags. And these two meta tags are just, they just got generated when I copy and pasted the boilerplate template for the HTML document. But meta tags are most often used for search engine optimization. So Google will use meta tags to determine which sites should be used or should be rated higher on the search engine and which sites should be lower down. It also gives the browser some browser specific information, such as this one, which is a meta tag with a name of viewport. So this meta tag basically tells browsers what to do if you're, say, if you're accessing a browser in your phone, then this meta tag will tell the browser that it needs to have some extra functionality as opposed to if your browser is accessed from a computer or a desktop or any larger device for that matter. And then the meta tag, which is a character set, this basically just defines the character set that you'll use, which is in this case UTF-8. You can also use Unicode or any other character sets. Maybe I can show you guys an example of meta tags. So if we Google hello world and we go into this Wikipedia page, and then we use the inspect tool to get the HTML document of the Wikipedia page, we do have access to the web, the header. So you can see here we have meta tag, which defines the char set again. I'm not sure if I can make this bigger for you guys. And then there's various other meta tags, such as refer. This is cross origin. So define some security tokens and various different other things. And then there will also be a meta tag that gives Google the information about what needs to be displayed. So this name over here will be a meta tag, and some of the details revolving around search engine optimization will also be in the meta tags. Does that explain your question? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. What's the advantage of using percentage over pixel? So the main advantage when it comes to using percentages over pixels is the fact that pixels are very, very specific. So if I say that a div needs to be 100 pixels wide, and so it must have a width of 100 pixels and must have a height of 100 pixels, then it will behave very differently as opposed to me saying that it must have a width of 100% or a height of 100%. So percentage is just defined as any of the space that is available to that specific div. So maybe I can give you an example just real quick, and then George, we can maybe carry on with a JavaScript if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Okay, cool. Let me just finish the example of using percentages over divs. So here we'll say, for example, we'll have a div here, and I will use inline CSS instead of CSS in the document. So inline CSS is basically making CSS attributes available to just the selector, just for the example. And I'll say that it's got to have a width of 100 pixels. And maybe a background color so that we can see it, because divs by default are invisible. So we'll make this have a background color of black. And if we go into the browser, oh, we need to give it a height as well because, yeah. So height 100 pixels. So it now has a width of 100 pixels and it has a height of 100 pixels. So there you can see that the div is using pixels. However, if we now change the width to percentage instead of pixels, so we'll say that the width must be 100%, then the DOM will make the div 100% width of the body element. So whichever the head, so currently the parent of the div is the body, and the body has a width of 100, or the full screen width. And therefore, if you make the div, which is a child of the body, 100%, then it will be 100% of the width of the parent. Just let me know if that makes sense to you. We can also maybe scale it down to only 80%. So there it kind of stops at 80%. So what I did with the CV wrapper is I aligned the CV wrapper to the center, and then I made the CV wrapper's width 60%. So it gave the width 60% of the screen, and then what it did was we obviously centered it. So there would be 20% on this side and 20% on that side. Cool. It's really powerful also when we working with mobile websites. So making a website very responsive across multiple devices, and because multiple devices have different screen sizes. So it is highly recommended that whenever you're building a website that will be on multiple device sizes, that it is defined in percentages instead of pixels, because 200 pixels on a phone could sort of make things go off the screen, whereas 200 pixels on a desktop monitor won't even reach the half of the screen. Let's remove this example. And let's remove.
All right. Are we about ready to get into part 2?
We are. I think this is where I'm going to end my screen share, and then you can take over from here, George.
All right. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing your knowledge about HTML and CSS. I hope everyone learned a lot about that. I did see that we do have some new participants joining us, and for you may have missed out on a bit of content. So, if you are here, fantastic. If you want to just follow along by watching, that's fine as well. But if you want to get your hands dirty and get coding, I recommend checking out the code that has been written so far. You can do that by running the command on screen right now, which is basically just cloning it from our repository. We made a repo. Remember, we had the GitHub workshop a few days ago. We made a repo, and the repo is right here on screen. It's github.com/devstudentclub-uct/webbasics. I'm gonna put this in the chat for you, but basically just run that command run that command, and you should have the code as it is so far. It is very important that you mention the branch -b scaffolding, and that will get you the code. And I'm gonna start in just a few milliseconds. All right. While we wait for everyone to get the code, some information about what we're doing here. Do you not need Git to run those commands? Yes. Sorry, you do need Git to run those commands. They work, obviously, they're Linux or whatever. Yeah. you do need Git to run that specific command, the clone command. If you don't have Git, then you can go to this link that I still have to put in the chat. Sorry about that. You can go to that link, and in the top right corner, if you want to, you can click on clone or download, and then you can click on download as zip, which will download the code as zip. Although that'll give you the finished code. But I mean, yeah, that's fine. You can still follow along. Okay, if you want the unfinished code, where you want to go is to this link that I'm going to send you now. So the first link that I sent in the chat goes to the finished code, and this link goes to the unfinished code, which is everything that we've done so far. So the command that you see here on screen will work. This will get you the code so far. If you do not have Git, then go to the second link that I put in the chat and download the code manually. Otherwise, just watch along. I promise you, you will learn. Of course, you're not going to get fit by watching someone run, but it is better than not watching someone run. Quote me. All right, so we're gonna get started here, and I hope that you all have the code to get going. All right, so here I've made the content nice and big. This is literally just the HTML file that we just made, verbatim. And I want to start putting in some JavaScript. So JavaScript is a language that was built for the web. It was originally called something else, ECMA, E-C-M-A. And the intention is still the same. It's code. It's a language built for manipulating the front end experience of websites. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works. You probably have heard of a lot of kind of cool frameworks and things like Angular and React and that stuff. And those frameworks are all built on JavaScript, and they're wonderful, and it's absolutely worth going into them. But they do say on their technical guides that you want to understand JavaScript before you get into that. So that's what we're doing here today. We're understanding JavaScript from first principles. So there's this thing in HTML called the script tag, which I put here at the end. And inside the script tag, you can have script stuff. So everything that happens in here is JavaScript. So the idiomatic way of printing output to the console is console.log and then some content. All right, and JavaScript, actually, you don't need semicolons. It's pretty cool, like Python, but I like my semicolons, so don't mind me. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this code, and exactly the same way as we did before, you can just drag and drop your index.html into a web browser, and it should show you what's cracking. So you can see here that there's nothing interesting happening yet, but the interesting things happen in the inspector. So you don't have to do this. I'm just going to show this to you for the lols. If you click here on console in your inspector, you can see here there's some content, hello world. And this is the content that was printed by our code. Now, this is the only that you'll see of the console, because from here on out we're going visual. But just for sake of for your information, if you want to do some debugging, you want to print to console, this is where you get it. You press F12, I believe it is, on Chrome, yeah, and that brings up the console for you. All right, so that's hello world for you. And just to reiterate, we have a script tag here at the end of all our HTML content, and it just has this one line printing hello world to the console. Now, it's about to get a lot more interesting, don't worry. I just want to get the basics down. The script tag is put at the end of this HTML file with purpose, and that is that so browsers are very cheeky. This is something you must understand, and it's something that you'll get used to the more you do web dev. They're very cheeky. So the way that browsers render content is they download the HTML file from the top down, as you would expect, but they don't wait for the download to finish. They render. As soon as they see this div tag here, it renders. It starts putting that stuff on the browser before you. So what ends up happening is, yeah, you'll sometimes, if your connection is slow, you can literally see the elements load from the top to the bottom as it appears. You can see that with images as well sometimes. And that is just one of the ways that browsers like to optimize things. And this is also why we link the style sheet at the top here. That's so that the browser loads in our styles before any of the content is shown to the user. And that is wonderful because that means that as soon as content gets shown to the user, it's already styled because the style sheet is already loaded. Now, in contrast to that, you put the script at the bottom. And the reason is the script doesn't do anything unless called upon. Wait, let me rephrase that. The script does actually do a lot of stuff. If you have a framework, for instance, it does a lot of loading of background content, and it does a lot of initialization and whatnot. And usually you would want that to happen after your content is loaded. So in this case, we're going to be making dark mode for my Homer over here. And to do that, we definitely want all the content loaded first. We don't want like dark mode to be enabled beforehand. So takeaway, idiomatically, you put the script at the end here. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, I actually don't want to script everything in this HTML file. It is best to do that in its own JavaScript file. So what I did here is I created a file called main.js, and it is in the same directory as my HTML file. And I'm just going to put the same content inside there. Obviously, it's not going to work straight off the bat. So what you do to make it work is you say script source equals main.js. As simple as that. So it's still a script tag, but it's just getting its content from a different file, namely this file. By the way, if console.log is too simple for your style, you want something more flashy, I can recommend using this function called alert. Alert is one of the 1,000,001 JavaScript built-ins. We're going to be going through a few of them today, but basically alert does, let me show you exactly what alert does. Bam, it gives you an alert. So use this sparingly. Users hate this, they hate pop-ups. But it is something that you can use if you want to impress your colleagues or if you want to do some really rough debugging. Bam. Okay, so that is alerting. That is the bare bones basics of getting JavaScript in your website. Okay, so the first thing, okay, so there are 3 things that we want to do today. Number 1 is, comments in JavaScript are 2 forward slashes, just like in Java. What we're going to do today is we're going to create a dark mode, light mode switcher. And then we're going to do a collapse expand system so that you can click on these individual headings and they'll collapse and expand the content. And if you don't know what I mean, you'll find out pretty soon. And then number 3 is we want to interact with GitHub's API. Now, this last one might be a little bit intense, and I feel like we should have like a whole workshop just on APIs. But so we might leave out number 3 if time does not permit. Okay, so let's start with dark mode. So the first thing that we want is this cool concept that we call a button. So I'm going to put a button beneath this div here, which is the blue bar. So this here. Okay, actually, let me show you. You can right click and you can click expect element. And what it'll do is it'll bring up the HTML document, specifically where you clicked that very tag. So you can see here that it's the div tag that I clicked. And inside there's an image and all kinds of cool things. So right over here, you see here, this is summary of qualifications. Between it and this, the profile wrapper, I'm going to put the button. And if you didn't follow along there, it's fine. Basically, just look for your profile wrapper. It's this one here. Find its end tag, which is that bad boy there. Press enter a few times for good measure and put in a button. Now, putting in a button is literally as simple as putting in a tag and giving it a title. Let's say switch to dark mode. And what this will do is just give you a button, and once clicked, well, it's not going to do anything, but it will give you a button. And that is pretty cool. See there? You can click it. Lit. So now what now? You can give that some spacing. I think the easiest way of doing that is just to abuse the BR tag here, which will literally just put in some spacing, some vertical spacing between the button and the div above it. Ka-chow. Right, so now we have a button that says switch to dark mode, and it does a whole lot of not much. So how about we make it do a whole lot of something? First thing you want to do is define a function. So the way that functions look in JavaScript is like this. So you just say function, that is how you define a function, open bracket, and then any content that the function receives. So in our case, it's a whole lot of not much. And then open curly braces. And I've messed up here. Oh, sorry, guys. You have to give the function a name. So let's call this switch dark. Nice. It sounds very, very shady, which is what we want. We're switching to dark mode. Okay, so this is how you define a function. Function switch dark, right? In here, you can give parameters if you want. Note that JavaScript is not a typed language. I mean, it's not a language with types. It's not strongly typed. So that means that you're not going to be saying that, oh, this is an int or that's a string. It's just, everything is just inferred and types just mash wonderfully. It's a lot like Python in that sense. Okay, cool. So that is, oh, that's a function. Fantastic. Now let's have the function actually do something. So there is this this cool constant. Okay, wait, hold up. I think first thing I'm going to do, is just document. Okay, so there's this cool constant called document. This thing is available globally, anywhere, everywhere, anytime. You name it, right? It's just, it's a global variable. It's called document, and it unsurprisingly refers to the document, the DOM. And it has a lot of cool functions. And the way you call functions on it is with the good old dot character. This is very similar to Java. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get an element. An element is basically just a tag, but it's one specific instance of a tag. I'm going to get the element named CV wrapper. Cool. So CV wrapper is that element right there. It is the, wait for it, wrapper for the CV. Yeah, okay. More specifically, it is this white part here. If you want to turn the whole thing dark, you can just select body, but I'm going to select the CV wrapper, which is this, which is the white part that you see here. Okay, cool. So that's what I'm selecting here with ID. Note that there's no hashtag in the beginning. That is just the way that it was decided to be. There's this whole hectic committee called TC39 that decides everything JavaScript, how the syntax works and what's available, what isn't. And they've decided that you do not put a hashtag when looking for an ID. And we respect their choices because we're good citizens. So this function gives me the ID. Then what you can do here is call style. So style is, you can see here it has a type called CSS style declaration, but basically it is just an associative array, which is like a really hectic name, but all it really is a map. It just maps attributes to values. So style here, the items in this style array correlate perfectly to these items here. So in our case, CV wrapper. So it'll have these items inside it. And we can manipulate them as we please. That's the wonderful thing about JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color. So that'll get me the attribute background color of the element CV wrapper. And I'm going to set this with just good old equals. And I'm going to set it to black. Cool. In here, you can have, you can have your RGB whatnots, or you can have your good old color selection with hex codes, but I'm just going to use black for sake of ease. Right, now this won't execute, and the reason is this function isn't called yet. To call it, all you do is you put an attribute called onClick, one word, no uppercases. Once again, you can blame TC39 for this. That's just the style they chose. OnClick, just those 6 characters, 7 characters, one word, and you put in there switch dark. And remember to put the brackets at the end, because that'll actually call the function. So what happens here is when this element is clicked, it will execute this, which is to say it will run that function, which is exactly what we want. Also note that you can, fun fact is that onClick works on literally every element. You can put it on a div if you want to. There are some other things as well, like you can look these up online if you want to, but you can put onClick on anything. Obviously, we're putting it on the button now because that's what makes most sense. So what happens when we click dark mode now? Whoa! Look at that, guys. We have dark mode. Now, the background is dark, but you'll notice that our text is gone. Actually, it's not gone. It's just black. You can see here that if I highlight it, the text is there, but it is black, and the background is also black. And so that's not Gucci. So what we typically do in these situations is we make the foreground white. So here's the way that works. You type document again, and you can say get element by ID, and then you can type in CV wrapper again, and you can say style, and then you can say color, which is the attribute that we want to change to white. Cool. So this will change the color. So color is this just means foreground color, basically. Once again, TC39 decided this is the way it is. There's a lot of conventions when it comes to web dev, and even more conventions when you start working with frameworks. But it's important to know these because they're very useful. So right, let's see if this works. By the way, every time you test your program, just hit F5 or just click refresh. So it refreshes the page so that it loads up the new content, and you're not testing old code. Woohoo! Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. We have a button that switches to dark mode. Okay, this is too cool for school. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to make this a toggle button. So what we want is that when we click this again, it must switch back to light mode. And that is just for ease of use. Now, okay, a few things we have to do to get that to work. Number one is I don't want to be calling get element by ID each time. It's not an expensive call, but it is aesthetically a very expensive call. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a variable. And in JavaScript, I can think of at least 5 ways that you can declare a variable. They all have their own advantages and disadvantages, but the one that I'm going to use is with declaring a constant. So a constant is pretty intense. Okay, so this is getting back to that distinction in mathematics. You remember in high school when they taught you mx plus c, and how like m is a constant variable and c is a constant variable, but x is a variable. What that just means is that when you say const CV wrapper equals this content here, what happens is this is a constant, right, insofar as it doesn't change, but it is a variable insofar as it does change over successive runs. So within this function, switch dark, this will not change, so it's constant, but it is a variable insofar as it will change if you call the function again. Don't worry about it. You know, if you can make this var, you can say let, you can do whatever you want, but just const is good because it just lets you remember that CV wrapper is not going to change inside this function, and that stands in contrast to other variables that may change in function. Okay, so now this just allows us to write a little bit code that's a little bit more neat. So this won't do anything new. This is just declaring a variable. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is do that whole toggle business. So remember, okay, so this is a constant variable insofar as it doesn't change inside the method. What I want now is I want a variable that will change outside the method. So what I want is some state. And state is something that we'll talk about in future workshops, but it is extremely easy in JavaScript. And some people actually critique JavaScript for how easy it is. I kid you not. So what we do here is we say let dark mode equal to false. And what this does is it declares a variable outside our function. So it's basic, it's actually global. At this point, dark mode is as global as document is. And this just allows us to keep track of whether we're in dark mode or not. Now, you can also do that by reading the text of the button and changing the text of the button. But for sake of neatness, I think it's cool to have our own little variable that does that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, make a if statement, and if statements work exactly the same way as they do in every single programming language on the planet. You just say if some condition and then brackets, and then that'll execute if true, and else if false. So in this case, what we want to do is if we're in dark mode, this might seem a little counterintuitive, we want to switch to light mode. And if we're in light mode, which is equal to not dark mode, what we want to do is switch to dark mode. Cool. So this code switches to dark mode, and I'm just going to take the exact same code and I'm going to inverse the colors, white and black. Okay, so let's talk through this. What's going to happen here is we're going to get the CV wrapper as an element. So this is the object, just like in Java, wherever. This is an object inside JavaScript, and it specifically references this element here, CV wrapper, this element here. But it references it in a way that JavaScript can manipulate. Then what we're doing is we're checking, are we currently in dark mode? So by default, that's false, which is correct. And if we are in dark mode, we want to switch to light mode. And the way we do that is we set the background color to white and we set the foreground color to black. Then else, if we are not in dark mode, that means we're in light mode, we're going to switch to dark mode. And we're going to do that using the exact same code with the colors inversed. So black for background, white for foreground. Okay. And let's just see if that works. So this is normal light mode, click, dark mode, click. Ooh, it doesn't change back. Hectic. So the reason it doesn't change back is because we're not actually altering the mode. And we can do that back here by saying dark mode equals not dark mode. So what you could also do is you can literally in here, you can be explicit. You can be like, yo, dark mode is now equal to false after we've changed, true after we've changed it to dark mode. And then, yeah, that's cool and everything. But you know, one day when you want to go work, you want to flex. You want to flex on your cool programming skills. And here, that's exactly how you do it. you say dark mode is equal to not dark mode. And what this does is it just flips the bit. So if it was false, it'll be not false. That's true. If it was true, it'll be not true. That is false. So this line here just flips whether it's dark mode or not. And remember, this dark mode is something we keep track of internally. It doesn't, like, changing this doesn't literally change the background color. That is what the method does. This is just our little Boolean to keep track of what's cooking. So click, clack. Whoa! Would you look at that, ladies and gentlemen? We've just created life. Okay, so we have a CV now that can switch between light mode and dark mode, which is fantastic. You know, if you have, if you send in, you know, your CV and it looks like this, and you're some guy in HR, or you're like a code reviewer, you want to check out, is this candidate cool or not? And he sees this button, oh, and it just works, and he clicks it again, and it just keeps on working. Yo, I can't tell you, do that immediately shortlisted. Not even, he won't even read this. He's just going to see this and be like, yeah, this guy deserves a job. Right. So this is where we're currently at. We have a little button. Now you might notice that the button, the text on the button doesn't change, and you might want to change that. And you know what? I respect that. I think we're going to do that. So as the background changes, we want to change the button text as well. And I think the coolest way of doing that is by declaring yet another constant, and we'll call it btn. And now, okay, so now what we could do is you could get like all of the elements by tag name, but the cleaner way of doing it is to give our button ID. We're going to be working with other buttons as well in the future, so let's just call this thing btn dark. And we'll say here, our button is document get element by ID btn dark, semicolon. Right there. Okay, cool. So we want to change the text of the button. All right. If we are switching to light mode, we want the button text to say switch to dark mode, right? Because now you want it to say the opposite of what it is, because that's like the way play and pause works, right? You show the pause button when it's playing, and you show the play button when it's paused. It's intuitive for the user. So we're going to say button, and to change its text, what we're really going to be changing is this here, which is called inner HTML. And realistically, I mean, this could be anything. You can have a span in here if you want to. You know, you can have an H1 tag. It won't look pretty, but you can. So that's why it's called inner HTML and not like inner text or whatever. So let's change inner HTML to switch to dark mode, and we're gonna make that with a capital D and a capital M to show whoever's reviewing our CV that we mean business and we're not here to play games. And we're going to do the same thing down here in the dark mode block. When we're switching to dark mode, we want the button text to say switch to light mode. Okay, cool. And now refresh that bad boy. Clickety-do. There you go. See there, the button text changes as you click it. All right, that concludes part 1 of our fantastic journey into JavaScript, which is basic manipulation of some HTML elements, button clicking, all that good stuff. And I will now be taking questions before we move on to the next part. And because I know that it's easy to zone out, you know, while you're watching these videos. So I won't hold it against you. If you missed something, just give me a quick holler there on the chat. I'm watching you, and then you can, and then I'll answer your questions. While I wait for you to think of some cool questions, I'm just going to walk through what we did here. So we made a function. We call it switch dark. we declared two variables, constant variables, and each of them refers to an element in our HTML document, DOM. Specifically, this one refers to CV wrapper, and this one refers to BTN dark. This text here is the ID of our button or our CV wrapper. It's literally, it's a nice way of referring to items, unique items. Yeah, you can't have more than one element with the same ID. So this is a surefire way to get that exact ID. This, of course, is going to return null if that doesn't exist, but we're not going to talk about error handling today. CV wrapper zoned out. Okay, so all right. So it's a question I think someone asked, and this line here, what it does is it from the document. This is a global variable that is a representation of the DOM. That is all this stuff here, all of it. And this function here, get element by ID. Wait for it. Gets the element by ID. The ID you pass it in. It's this one right here, CV wrapper. That is the ID of the CV wrapper. This Jonathan defined earlier on in the HTML section. It is an ID. It is the ID of the outside wrapper div, which is this white area here. The white area that you see here, the whole white area. It is a div, and it has an ID called CV-wrapper. Cool. So that's basically that's how this works. It gets, so this function here gets that element, and we put it in a variable. There we go. Now here, if we're in dark, okay, same thing with button. Now over here, we have our own little variable, dark mode, and we update it as we go. If you are in dark mode, you will then switch to light mode, and you're going to do that by calling some stuff on the variables we've defined here. So these variables are of type, let me tell you now, HTML element, and that type has, I know I told you JavaScript doesn't have types. It doesn't have explicit types. You can have types and classes and things. Don't worry about that. It's not important. All you have to know is that all this stuff here is literally representations of the DOM of what you see here, all the tags. So when I say CV wrapper.style, what I'm doing is I'm accessing the style of the CV wrapper. That is this right here. And I'm setting its attribute background color to white. Now, the reason this is in square brackets is because style is an associative array, which basically is just a map. This is just the idiomatic way of accessing, what's it called? Attributes, accessing items of a map in JavaScript. This is the way that you alter an associative array. Yeah, so you can set other things as well. You know, you can set you can set the size, you can set the height, the width, you can set its float, you can do all that stuff. This by the way is equivalent to putting a style attribute here and saying something like, you know, color white. It's exactly the same thing, but it does this in code. It does this when this function is called. It doesn't do it constantly. I mean, in a constant, you know, yeah, like it doesn't do it statically. That's what this does here. This is statically, meaning it only happens once and it's like unchanging. It's monolithic. But here it happens variably, so or dynamically rather, once the function is called. Okay, that was a lot of content. Basically, in a nutshell, we're just switching dark mode, and the way we're doing that is by getting elements and altering their style. Also here, we're changing the text on the button by inner HTML. Cool. Can you have styles in one line? Hell yeah, you can. Oh, I see. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, so you can have multiple statements in a line. To change, let me think, what is the coolest way of changing multiple styles at the same time? What I would recommend doing is instead of, so the question was whether you can do both of these items in like one statement. And so short answer is no, but what you can do is you can define a class, for instance. I'm not going to do this now, but you can make a class and you can call it like BG black, for instance. And this will just, and you can put these attributes, and you can have another class called BG white. And then here, what you can do is instead of those two lines, you can have cwrapper dot class list dot add, and then just say BG black. Or actually, you don't want to add that probably. You want to say, place maybe. Yeah, here we go. Okay, class list dot replace BG black with BG white. There you go. And then that'll change the class from black to white. And then in your class, you can have these definitions. We'll get around to doing this in at the end of the workshop if there's time. All right, so that's that. Cool. Then I want to remind everyone that Zoom has a super cool feature where you can say, you can raise your hand, you can say go slower, go faster, or you can give a hand clap, and that will allow me to know how you guys are doing, whether you're following, etc. So I'm gonna, I appreciate the hand clap, guys, thank you. So I'm gonna move on now to the next part, which is collapsing and expanding. Yeah, okay, so what collapsing and expanding is we want to be able to click on like the headers here, and we want that to hide or show the content here. So I want to click on employment history, and then all this must just be gone. And I want to click it again, and then it must appear again. And that's very cool, especially if you have a lot of content, like this guy over here. Homer Simpson's been a busy man, you know. And you know, when you're an employer and you're looking through someone's CV, you don't want to scroll past all the million jobs that he's had since 1990. You just want to click employment history, and then there it is. And then you want to click on education, and then there it is. Yeah. So let's make that happen. Let's make that dream a reality. Okay. The way we're going to do it is we're going to be reordering a little bit of Jonathan's elements here, and the reason for that, actually, I'll show you exactly what the reason for that is. So let's make the function first. So let's say function toggle collapsed. Okay, and what this is going to do is this is going to take in an ID as a parameter, element ID, and basically we're gonna collapse that bad boy. So this element here is going to be some element in the DOM, and the function is going to collapse or expand it. Okay, so we're not gonna have our own state, like, you know, like to keep track of what is collapsed and what isn't. That's a bit of a muchness. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna read the style of the item itself. So how do we do that? So let's get the element, and we do that by saying document.getElement by ID, element ID. Okay, cool. Now we're going to check what state it's in. So we don't know, right? The way we're going to collapse and expand is by altering the style called display. And if it's shown, this will be equal to block, and if it's not, it will be equal to hidden. But basically, we want to check we want to check what's cooking, right? And this is the way we do it. So we're just going to check what is this display currently set to. This is an attribute that we're gonna change. We want to check what it is. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a bit of a hint here. And I'll tell you that by default, this array doesn't contain all the defaults of all the attributes. At length, like the browser has its own internal set of defaults. It doesn't pass all the defaults to you. So by default, what happens is this is just null. So if display hasn't been set explicitly, this is null. Or yeah. So you can, in JavaScript, you can check null by doing this. But another way of doing it, which covers more edge cases, is by just forcing it into a Boolean by doing that. And what this does is, and this may look very wrong to you, and if it does, I applaud you, because that means that you know how types work. But what this does is, it's called type coercion. So just like you might coerce someone into doing something that you want, JavaScript coerces this variable into acting like a Boolean, even though it isn't one. It's a string. So what that means is, by default, when you say not a string, what it does then is it says, okay, if this is null, then okay, let's write this out actually. Null is coerced into false. Okay, before I continue here, a quick message from our club lead. The event is running a little bit late. I'm glad to see so many people are still here, still enjoying what's going on. If you if you have to go do something, that's fine, that's chill. This will be recorded, this will be up. You can follow this later. You don't have to be here live. If you want to go and do something that's chill, go do something. There's a link in the chat to the feedback form, and we ask that you please do fill that in before you go, just so that we know how to improve our workshops here. But for the rest of you that are still sticking around, let's continue our journey. So null is coerced into false. An empty string. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned the strings are represented with single quotes. Double quotes also work. JavaScript is very loose when it comes to that. Single quotes is coerced into false, and anything else is coerced into true. And this is fantastic for us, because this means that if it is coerced into false, then it hasn't been set, meaning it's being displayed. If it has been coerced, then, if it is true, then that means that it has been set. Okay, so if our display has not been set, or it is this, if it's not been set, or it is set to this item called block. Block is the default basically setting for display, and it just means that it's displayed as a block. A block being like, basically a block meaning it's vertical alignment. So you'll see here that you have all these blocks, like this is a block, this heading is a block, this is a block, these are all blocks. And if your display is set to block, that just means that you're going to have a bunch of blocks going down. There are other display modes as well, which I won't get into right now. Okay, so if this hasn't been set yet, or it is set to block, then in both those cases, what we want to do is hide. We're gonna hide, or actually collapse, but it's the same thing actually. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say element.style open bracket display equals none. And what this will do is it'll literally just set the attribute display to none, which will effectively hide it. Okay, cool. And then we're going to say else. We obviously want to show that display. Yes, display equals block. Okay, let's walk through this. We get the element from the DOM. This element will show you exactly what this is going to be, but it's going to be defined dynamically. So we get the element from the DOM. We check what its isDisplay status is. If it has not been set, which is this, which is what that means, then you want to collapse it. Or alternatively, if it has been set to block, which means that it's being displayed, then you also want to collapse it. So this is just the OR statement. This by the way is an OR statement. An OR operator. It just means that if either of these are true, then this is what's going to happen. It's going to set the display to none. Otherwise, we're setting the display to block. Right. So let's use this bad boy. So we're going to start off with a summary here, and we'll see. It'll say H2 over here. We'll give it an onClick attribute, and we'll say that when you click on the heading, we're going to toggle collapsed, and in here we're going to pass the ID of what we want to collapse, summary. So you'll see I pass in here summary, which is the exact same ID as over here, which is the div, the ID of this summary div right here. And you'll see that I use single quotes here because I'm passing it in as a string, which is what it should be. And this is one of the reasons that that JavaScript supports single quotes for strings. Because if you had to use a double quote now, you'd have a bit of a problem because we use double quotes on the outside of attributes in HTML. You can see that everywhere. But we use single quotes on the inside for JavaScript strings. So what does this do? When you click it, it's going to call this function and it's going to pass in that string there. The function is going to take that string and it's going to, it's going to hide or it's going to display. It's basically going to toggle whether it exists. All right, let's see that in action. Okay, so I'm going to click on this and whoa, it's gone. So, all right, so that's, so that's a bit worrying because now it's completely gone. It's like not even, I can't even get it back now. And the reason for that is because H2 is inside the thing that you're hiding, the div. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move it outside, like that. And so that's literally what we're doing. We're just moving the H2 outside the div so that it exists whether or not the content is hidden. So you'll see here now, I can click it and it should toggle. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so that is absolutely lit. Now what we're going to do is the exact same thing for the other headings. I'm just going to move this outside and I'm going to add an onClick. I'm going to say toggle collapsed, and in here I'm going to pass in the ID of what I want to collapse. So in this case, that is employment history wrapper. Cool. And finally down here at the education section, exact same thing. I'm going to move this heading outside. And I'm going to say onClick equals toggle collapsed, and education is the name of the ID that we're toggling. That is there. And if you thought you were done, surprise, surprise, because we still have to do awards. And it is exactly the same thing, just here. onClick, toggle collapsed, education, awards. So you might be asking me, yo, George, that was not a lot of fun typing out these 20 characters 4 times. That's not a vibe. Now, the thing is, you can, if you want to automate this, such that as soon as the JavaScript runs, it'll just set those click listeners. These are called These are called event listeners, specifically on-click listeners. And you can set these dynamically, but that's, you know, for our purposes, I think it's fine if you just copy and paste these 20 characters 4 times. Right, so now what we should have is automatic collapsing and expanding of our sections. Yo, look at that. Look at that. Bam. What do I want to see? I want to see education. Click. Bam. There it is. I want to see employment history. Bam. There it is. Yo, guys. You're just going to, the companies, they're just going to hand you blank checks. And then you're just going to fill in your own salary. That's what's going to happen when you give them the CV. All right. Okay. So now another thing that you might want to do is you might want to indicate that these headings are clickable. So as they stand, they're not very clickable. Well, I mean, they are literally clickable, but I mean, there's no indication to the user. I mean, this is a button. That's at least clear, you know, that's clickable, but not so much for the headings. So the way that we, you know, or one way that we can show the user that it's clickable is to make your cursor, which is the mouse, commonly referred to as the mouse icon, to make the cursor change into a clicky hand thing when you hover over it. Just like when you hover over a link, you know, like if you search anything on Google and you hover over a link, you see here that your cursor becomes a hand with a 4-finger pointed outwards. This may look different on different operating systems, but that is a nice idiomatic way of letting the user know that that thing is clickable. And you can actually force this in CSS by saying the following. So we're going to say h2:hover, which just means that as soon as the mouse hovers over an h2, that's what the colon means. We're going to say cursor, that we're going to change the cursor attribute to pointer. So that's what it's called formally, is the pointer. And you'll see now that if I hover over the h2, my cursor becomes a pointer. And that is a nice clean way of showing the user that, hey, you can click me if you want to. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do a cheeky pause right there, and you can ask any questions you want now about collapsing and expanding. And then I'm gonna go on to putting a button here that collapses and expands all the items, which is gonna be pretty fast. But yeah, if you have any questions, now's your time. I am all ears. Okay, I'm just gonna, where is education now? Oh, that was a missing horizontal rule over here. There you go. Clean. All right. If there are no further, or if there are no questions to mention, I'm going to add a button here at the top that will that'll toggle the status of all these events. I mean, yeah, it'll toggle all of them, because sometimes, you know, they exist, you know, we have to provide for them as good programmers. Sometimes you get people that actually, they just don't want to think, you know, they see this and they're like, yo, effort, what now? There's no content here. It doesn't work. It's glitchy, yada, yada, yada. Those people exist. And for them, what we're going to do is we're going to add a nice button right over there. And the button is going to say expand all. And then when they click it, it's going to wait for it, expand all. So let's, for our less technically inclined people, let's give them a little button that does that. So we're going to say here, we're going to make a toggle. So I'm just going to say expand / collapse all, and for our on-click, what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to make a new function because this one doesn't do what we want it to do. We're going to say, toggle all collapsed. Actually, what we should do is we should call it toggle collapsed to follow suit and then put all at the end. Okay, now what we definitely don't want to do is literally collapse every single element here because some of them are pretty crucial for other purposes in the document. So what we want to do is we want to somehow indicate which divs are collapsible and which are not, or actually just the former. So to indicate a collapsible div, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the class of such divs to collapsible, and that is definitely spelled with an A. Oh no. How do you spell collapsible? Don't tell me this is another one of those UK versus US things. It looks like it is. Yeah, or they're synonyms anyway. Okay, so you can spell collapsible with an A or an I, whatever your preference is. And what you want to do is you want to put this right here, class equals collapsible. You want to put this on every div that is collapsible, and there are 4 of them. So I'm going to paste it there. I'm going to put it here at education, and finally at awards as well. Cool. Now, I think just for the fun of it, I'm going to make collapsible. I'm going to make it hidden by default, and that is, I think, a pretty cool way to do it in general. Just so that you're not overwhelming the reviewer as they're checking out your CV. It's just not, it's clean, it's awesome. It's just 4 cheeky little elements here, and you can just click on any of them and they expand. Hold on, I think I have made a mistake here. Oh, yes. Okay. So there's a cheeky little logic bug, nothing immense. What I did here is I assumed that if it's not set, then it is displayed. What I should do is I should move this over to the bottom part. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, I'm going to switch over. I'm just going to switch these if blocks. I'm going to say that not being set is identical logically to being hidden. And then I'm just gonna alter that. I could show, and here I'm gonna collapse. Okay, so what I did here was I just changed the logical progression, and I just said that if your display is not set, that is logically identical to it being set to none, and in which case we set it to block, which is to show it. Otherwise, we set it to none, which is to hide it. So now this should mean that we are hidden by default and we show on click. Cool. If you're wondering how that works, in a nutshell, let me show you right here. So we set the default display to be hidden, which means that they're hidden by default. But then when you click on the element, let me show you here. When you click on the element here, what happens is it sets the attribute display equal to something. And you'll see here, this might be a bit small for you, but basically there is a hierarchy of, shall we say, presence, a hierarchy of importance when it comes to elements. And the class, if your class says that the display is none, but your element attribute says something else, then the element will automatically override it. So what that means for our use case is that by default, all these things, all these elements that are part of the class collapsible are collapsed. And then once you click it, it's overridden by our code here by accessing the style. Cool. Almost done, guys, I promise. What we want to do here now is give some functionality to our function, which toggles all of the items. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all of the collapsible items. And the way I do that is by saying get elements by class name. And I'll say here, the class name is collapsible. Cool. And now I'm going to iterate through them. There are many ways to iterate through an array or a collection, but the way to do it in this specific case is, oh, you know what? Yeah, I actually did it. Okay, so the for loop, cool. So the way our for loop works is we just like for a variable section, for instance, of, and then we just say all collapsible. So what this does is it iterates through every section inside this here, which is a collection of elements, all collapsible. And in JavaScript, you use the of keyword to indicate that you're iterating through a collection. You can also use in, but that does something different and it should be used with caution. This is unlike Python where in just works perfectly. So use of where you can. So for each section, what we're going to be doing now is what we could do is we could just collapse it with this code. But I'm too lazy for that. I'm going to reuse some code. So I'm just going to call my method that I already wrote, toggle collapsed, and I'm going to pass in the section. The section is an element though. So what I want to do is get its ID. And you just do that by saying section.id. And this should work. Oh, you know what? I just have to make sure that JavaScript understands that this is in fact a variable. Cool. So for const section, that is our each variable of all collapsible. So this is our collection. We're going to toggle its collapse. So section is a full element. We just want its ID because its ID is used in this function here. One last thing is we just want to make sure that the button does actually respond to clicks, and we do that by saying onClick is equal to toggle collapsed all. Right, give that a good old refresh, click the button, and Bob is your uncle. Right, there you go. So now everything is expanded, and you can click it again, and then it's hidden. Oh, you know what? I think I might have one horizontal rule too many down here. Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. So yeah, there you have it. Bob is your uncle. So what you can do now is you can expand all, you know, and you can individually click on them, and you can also collapse all, and you can switch to dark mode and do it in simultaneity. All right, cool. So I think this is what I'm going to call the day today. I know we didn't do anything too remarkable, and that is mostly because we're not using a framework. And if you're using native JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript as it's called, then it does take a bit more time to give your content functionality, not to mention explaining how everything works. But I hope you have a bit of a better feel for JavaScript now. You know, if you want, I can recommend, you know, trying to fiddle around with this. You know, obviously make this your own CV. Don't just use Homer Simpson. add some more buttons, add a button, that collapses your employment history items, for instance, or, try and make 5 buttons that switch between 5 different color themes, or, just have some fun, and maybe a button that changes the image or something like that. And write something that is cool for you, and that'll be cool for a HR reviewer of your application. In the future, we're going to be doing workshops on how to host this on some sort of hosting service, and that'll be wonderful. So you can actually have a link that you can send. At the moment, all you have is an HTML file, which is where you start. Baby steps. All right. So this concludes our workshop over here. If you have any questions, now is your time. I remind you all to go fill in the feedback form that Jonathan posted in the chat, and so that we can serve you and improve your coding experience even more. Jonathan, is there anything that you would like to say as final remarks?
Yeah, George, I just want to thank you for the awesome JavaScript work that you did there. I think everybody learned so much while watching your magic fingers do the work. Yeah, I also just want to encourage you guys to keep exploring. This is obviously the bare minimum, covering the basics of all 3 technologies. There's so much more that you can do with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but unfortunately, we don't have the time to show you everything. So yeah, definitely give us feedback on the forum. Tell us if you'd like to go more in depth with a course like this, maybe covering more in depth JavaScript or HTML, maybe even just checking out a framework. And then, yeah, you guys must have an awesome time, and we will be here for questions, probably for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, I see there's a question about where we are advertising our workshops. If you're part of the Vula site, you'll get notifications. If you're subscribed manually to our mailing list, you'll get notifications. If you're on the WhatsApp group, you'll get notifications. If you're on Instagram, you'll get notifications. And yeah, that about exhausts every platform we're on at the moment. Looking to expand as well. Easiest is just follow us on Instagram. It has been posted in the chat there. At DSC_UCT, it is in the chat. Yeah, you can also, I guess we can send them the WhatsApp link, WhatsApp group link.
Yeah, sure.
Which I don't have at the moment. But anyway, that's another place we're getting it. I saw, with regards to our future, we're going to be having, on May the 27th, there will be a blockchain basics workshop, which is fantastic to add to your CV, to say that you have some experience with basic blockchaining. That'll be coming up on May the 27th. And then on Tuesday, the 9th of June, we're going to be having a LinkedIn webinar. And I believe that is in collaboration with some Microsoft staff members. So just to get your LinkedIn fresh and up and running. And yeah, that is all that is scheduled at the moment. We're also looking into getting into other workshops to better serve our community. Of course, you can head over to our feedback form, which has been posted in the chat, to give us more suggestions about what we can do to your end. I appreciate all the thanks. I appreciate everyone for coming through and watching this workshop. I hope it worked for you. This video will be posted on our somewhere, probably on our Vula site, and notifications will be sent out to all the appropriate channels. So if you missed something, you want to go through it again, go ahead and do that. Check that out. And the final code, by the way, if you don't want to watch through the whole video, the final code has also been posted in the chat. It is the link, the repo link on our GitHub. devstudentclub-uct/web basics. There's a link to our Villa site in the chat as well. So yes, that I believe is it. One last thanks to everyone that has come through, and of course, I wish you all the best with maintaining your sanity in these desperate times. Hope your coursework is going well, and may all that is good and fortunate come your way. Good night.